Hey everyone, sorry about that. We had a little bit of a technical issue, so we're going to start over. Welcome. My name is Amy. I'm with Edwin Loy Home, and I'm glad you're tuning in today with us. We're going to be doing a 2-color distress using Annie's chalk paint. So starting over, basically what we're going to do is we're going to layer 2 of Annie's colors. We're going to be using this great lamp. This is kind of in the process, so I'll show you the back first side. So this is a great way to add some interest or variety to a piece of furniture, a lamp, pretty much anything that you have. So, and these are some examples of other colors that you can layer. So right here we have olive over cocoa, and then we have duck egg underneath Aubusson blue here. So these are just some examples, and there's lots of different ways that you can layer colors to get different textures. So today we'll be doing a lot of textured brush stroke. We won't necessarily be doing too much stippling, but you can see if you stipple the brush a little bit, you can get this kind of raised effect that will pop through once you sand it. But these are just some examples. We'll be using Emperor Silk and Cream, and it's a really fun technique to do, and I hope you're all excited. Feel free to ask us questions. Follow us for more information as we do videos more and more too. So if you haven't followed us online too, follow us on Facebook and Instagram too. And you can also visit our website for class schedules. We will be having a class coming up that will feature the distressed look as well as our wash tech. The colors that we have chosen are Emperor Silk and Cream. I have a variety of brushes here. I have Annie's natural bristle brush, and then I have just one of our 2-inch brushes that I like to use. They're a little bit less dense and they can have a little bit more flexibility to them. We also have our clear wax. We're going to age with the dark wax. So then I have 2 wax brushes, Annie's, and then one of our little mini off-brand brushes. And then our waxing rags and our sandpaper. And of course some water to rest our brushes in when we move from color to color. And just some stirring sticks. Just a brief little talk about colors. How do you choose a color? Or colors, excuse me, when you're layering. Honestly, any color can go together. It's up to you. You might have a few colors in your space that you want to add some of those colors together to bring the room together, or if you might have a lot of blues and you want to add a complementary color in there, just peeking through. So when you have a color card, Annie made these fabulous color cards, and basically when you look at this, you're going to see that she set it up like an artist's color wheel. So basically, when you look at this, you always, say you have a lot of blues in the room, you want to bring in a pop of color that complements blues, you're going to look across the color wheel. So oranges and blues complement each other, greens and reds, and yellows and purples. So this is really helpful when you're trying to figure out in your space. Now, that doesn't mean that these colors can't go together elsewhere, because they definitely can. As you can see, we're layering Cream, which is a buttery yellow, over Emperor Silk, which is a really pretty red. So don't be afraid to experiment too. It's that's why she's created this paint, is to have fun with it and not be afraid to use it. So we have these color cards available at the shop if you need one. They're $1.95 and they are painted chips, so they're really great to have. Another thing that's really nice are her books. So her books are fabulous. They have a lot of information in them. Her Quick and Easy, it's kind of like the go-to book that we kind of recommend to everyone. But there's a couple examples in here of her layering colors. So definitely stop in if you want to check it out, just to kind of get a brief overview, or stop in to purchase one so that you can take it home and start painting and having fun. And there's lots of other techniques in here. So her books are definitely worth the read to get kind of more in-depth chalk paint.
Jane says hello.
Hi Jane, how are you today? So let's start with where we were at on this lamp. So basically we've cleaned the lamp. That's the most important thing. Remember, is that you always want to clean the surface well before you start painting it. That way we can ensure that the paint can bond to the surface. So we've painted this. It was chipping a little bit, just the kind of the finish that was on it. So I sanded it back just a little bit so it stopped chipping and peeling. And then I just started painting it. So chalk paint really bonds and adheres, which makes it such a great paint to work with. So this is just 1 coat, this is 2 coats, and then this is the cream layered over top of the Emperor Silk. And you can see how we have that Emperor Silk popping through. So that's what we want to achieve. And then when we wax it, we're going to show you how you can further distress it and then we'll play with the dark wax to further highlight just some of these crevices here that will make it really pop and give it dimension. So where we're gonna start is I'm gonna show you how you really wanna apply your base coat. So when you're applying your base coat with a 2-color distress, having some texture and brush stroke is great, because when you apply the waxes and the top coat first and then the waxes, it really helps pop, and you can see some of those brush strokes. Now if you are more of a clean, more modern look, that's totally fine too. You can still layer colors that way as well. I just prefer a little bit of brush stroke. So we're just going to take our paint here. We're going to start with our Emperor Silk, and basically I'm just going to apply the paint all over the surface, making sure I cover the areas. And you can see remember from the last videos, I'm kind of laying the paint down. You get better surface coverage when you kind of just lay the paint versus pressing and pulling. So when you're painting, just lighten your hand, don't use such a heavy hand. I'm going to kind of stay away from my side here that I've already done the cream, because I want to make sure that we can see the finished product here. We're just going to lay this down. So I'm going to kind of you can move your brush any which way. And I like to hold my brush down around the ferrule, which is that silver part. You don't have to paint up this way. You kind of get a little bit more control when you kind of grasp your hand around that area. So as you can see, I'm just kind of laying it down, working my way around, just covering the base color. It's getting pretty good surface coverage with just this one coat, but when it dries, it will definitely be a little bit more opaque and translucent. So reds tend to have a little bit more of a transparency to them. That's why it typically takes a little bit more paint when you're painting with red. I don't know if you've ever painted a red wall, but it takes a lot of paint sometimes. And I taped off the cord here, so if you have something that you don't want the paint to get on, make sure you tape it off. It makes it a lot easier. You can go right around that little metal part though on the lamp, that's totally fine. And be sure to angle your project too, so you can get all those little areas. So you can see I'm just kind of going every which way with my brush strokes. I want to see some of that texture come through. So I'm not going to be so precise and even with my brush strokes. I'm kind of letting my hand just loosen up and go all over the place. So just watch for drips too on projects like something like this that has a lot of detail, because if you get a drip, our first instinct is to pick it off, and we don't want to do that. You always want to sand it back, because if you take it off, you're going to create a big void. So just sanding it back will help it cover it up easier when you go to do another coat over it. So that's one coat. You can see it's not perfect, but like I said, red is more of a translucent pigment. This is one coat dried. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do another coat over top of that. So I'm gonna come around here and make it a little bit easier. So you can see, we're just gonna apply it just to get a little bit better coverage. And there again, tilt it if you need to, your project. If it's a dresser or something, you might just have to lean it back or kind of manipulate it to get it covered. So you can see how it's covering it nice now. We're getting really good coverage on this second coat. It's really important when you put a second coat on as the base, especially a color like this, just because when we go to do our top coat, if you don't have good base coverage and you go to distress, you're going to distress basically down to the original finish. So it's really important that we get good coverage on our base coat. So I like how this looks. We have nice coverage here. This is the side that I applied the second coat to. So you can see it's covered it nicely. You can see the difference between the one coat coverage and the two coat coverage here. And then like I said, remember, watch those drip marks. And then the front has already dried with the second coat, so we can see how nice this looks. So basically, you're going to let that dry completely before you do your top coat. Otherwise, your colors are going to blend together, which not necessarily may be a bad thing, but for this is not the technique that we are doing. So now we're going to switch over to cream. It's a buttery yellow. It's really pretty. It's just a soft, creamy yellow. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna switch over to this just 2-inch chip brush. It's a little bit more flexible. And I'm gonna get the look here by, when I'm painting, leaving open areas of that base coat coming through. So I'm not gonna completely cover the surface. I'm gonna leave it a little bit showing. That just cuts down the amount of sanding that I have to do when it comes time to distressing it. So it just cuts back on all our sanding. So basically, I'll show you how to do that, and then we'll wax this side, and then we'll further distress it as well, so you can get the full effect of painting, leaving some open areas, as well as then distressing to get down to your base coat. So you're gonna take your brush. You don't need a lot on it, just a little bit. Just dab the tips of the brush in. And basically, what I'm gonna do, make sure I get this red off here. I'm just gonna kind of very gently just kind of lay this down. So you can see I'm gonna kind of leave open areas showing. I'm hardly touching it. I'm just kind of grazing over top of it. And it's gonna look really nice over this wreath and raised areas here. So let's kind of come down this way. Is that good there, Alina?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see how you can just kind of leave some of that Emperor silk peeking through. Just gonna work my way around, just very gently kind of laying the paint down, watching that area because it's still a little bit wet with that Emperor silk. So it really starts to get this really pretty effect. You don't need a lot, like I said. So now we're going to kind of come in here and just kind of go over top of this. And that really will help, by painting in the distressing, it will really help with the amount of distressing that you have to do in the long run. So when you get into something that has a little bit more detail, I like to kind of put less paint on my brush so I'm in control and it's not overwhelming when you're going to do this technique. If you have too much paint on your brush, all of a sudden the paint takes over and then you've pretty much covered everything up. So make sure you get down in there. Pull that paint. Some of that Emperor silk is coming over because it's wet on this side, but it's okay. So I'm just kind of feathering it in, like so. Now I'm going to do that little center part, so I don't want as much showing of the red kind of in that recessed area. I'd rather it be more on the raised areas. And a little artist brush would be good for something that's detailed like this too. You can kind of dab it in there too to kind of get those little areas covered. So it looks pretty nice. I like how that's turning out. You can also, as it's starting to dry, to get a little bit more texture, if you want some more textures, you just take a little bit more paint and you can just kind of drag it over, or you can just take your brush and drag it through the paint as it's drying. You don't have to add more paint. But I want to get it a little bit thicker. You can definitely do a second coat if it's not covering quite as well as you wanted it to. Just remember when you put the clear wax on, it's going to lighten the paint just a little bit. Darken it. So it will darken it, but if the paint isn't on as well, you're going to see some of the original finish coming through too. Original base color, excuse me. So I'm just going to go ahead and thicken it up here. Give me a nice aged look. So I like how it looks. I think it looks really pretty. I think we have good coverage. And then what I'm going to do is I kind of went over this with a little bit of paint. So let me wipe this off because we need to wax this side. So that is doing the top coat over your base coat. So basically we did 2 coats of the Emperor silk, and then I just brushed on the cream, which is a buttery yellow, which is showing still some of the base coat coming through, because we're going to do 2 color distress essentially is what we're doing. So it really cuts down on the amount of sanding that you have to do in the long run when you can leave some of that base color coming through. So let's go to this side. And we're going to clear wax is what we're going to do. Smaller project. So we have our clear wax. It's a soft paste wax, really easy to work with. And then I have Annie's waxing brush here. If you just want to use a rag, feel free to do a rag. You don't necessarily have to get out a waxing brush when it's something small like this. On a bigger project, it definitely will help. So we're going to just apply the wax. You can see how it deepens the color. I'm just doing this section, remember, because everything else is wet right now, is wet paint. So we're going to just apply it here. But this way you guys can all see how to get the finished look. So I'm just applying the wax. Now I'm going to take my waxing rag and I'm going to work it in. And just remove all the excess wax. So it just shouldn't feel sticky or tacky, just dry at the touch. Now at this point, some of you might like how it looks. It's just great. If you want to add a little bit more distressing, you're just going to grab a 220 grit sandpaper. And we always recommend doing the distressing after the first coat of wax because it really cuts down on the amount of sanding dust that you create. So now we're just going to come through and I'm just going to lightly sand off some of that paint to get more of the Emperor silk coming through. And it's very gentle. You don't have to press real hard at all. If you wait to do the distressing the next day, you might have to press a little bit harder because the wax starts to cure immediately. So the longer you wait, the harder the wax gets and the harder it gets to distress down to either wood or a base color. So if you can do one coat of wax and start your distressing right away, that's usually the best thing to do just because it makes it a little bit easier on you. See, I'm just adding a little bit more in the raised kind of interest areas here. Maybe I'll add a little bit here too so you can see. So you can see how you can pop that red through. I'll do some on this side too so you can get that effect. It's pretty how it's coming through there. This side as well. So just kind of dust that off. Now basically, before we can do our dark wax application, we need to make sure that we seal this back up with the clear wax. Otherwise, these areas will become very dark brown kind of, and that is because the dark wax acts like a stain right on top of the paint. So it's really important that you put clear wax down and then you age over with either the dark, the black, or even the white wax. Because otherwise those waxes will act like a stain on your paint. The only time we really recommend doing any of the darker black is on graphite. If people want it to be more of a black, you can do graphite, black wax, and then a coat of clear wax. So now we're just going to take a little bit more clear. You can see how it makes that red pop then. So it's really important that when you're doing your distressing as well, that you take your time and you don't go heavy-handed at it and you don't step back and look at your piece too as you're distressing. People tend to take way too much off, and then you have to do all kinds of touch-up painting if you don't like how it looks. And it's really important too to just lightly distress, because if you press too hard, you can cut down to your original finish. So if your original finish is something you don't want to see, you just need to be careful when you're doing your distressing that you don't press too hard. So that's distressed clear waxed, and now I'm going to show you the dark wax. So the dark wax is a great way to add a little bit more dimension. You don't need a lot of it. It's more about just a thin, even layer. So I'll just do it all over so you can see how it'll look and how it changes the color too. So I'm just going to apply it here, all over, where we just finished clear waxing. And then I'm going to let it sit up for about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to show you how you can rub and remove the excess. I'm going to make it just a little bit, I want it to kind of recess in these areas a little bit more. So I'm just going to put it on a little bit thicker. It's still thin, but it's just a thicker application. If it's too thickly applied, basically what's going to happen is when you go to rub in and wipe off, you're going to take it all off, because if it's too thick, it's keeping it soft the entire time while it's trying to age. So it's just important that the dark wax doesn't go on too thick. Also, you need to make sure that you grab a clean rag when you're going to start doing the rubbing and the removing of the excess wax. If you use a clear waxing rag that you've been using, it's going to take it all off, because clear wax will remove dark, black, or white wax. So we let that sit up. Now I'm just going to rub in and see how it's kind of changed that color. Looks really pretty. And it's recessed down in these areas too. So it's taken that buttery, soft yellow and it's kind of deepened it a little bit more. So if this is a little bit too dark and you want to see just a little bit lighter, I always just wrap my rag around my hand, add a little bit of clear wax, and then I can just gently take off some of that dark wax. And you can see how it just pulls it off. And what this really does too when you do this is you are pressing the dark wax down into those brush marks and those textured marks. So it really gives it some nice visual interest. So now I'm just going to remove it. And just make sure it's not sticky or tacky anywhere, that you just remove that excess wax. I think it turned out really nice. I like how it looks. So basically we have Emperor Silk as your base coat with some brush stroke and texture, and then we applied the cream over top. And then when we did that though, we made sure that we were leaving some open areas of the Emperor Silk coming through, so it would really reduce the amount of sanding that we had to do. After that had dried, we then clear waxed it. We used a little bit of sandpaper, a 220 grit, just a medium grit, to distress a little bit more down to the Emperor Silk. We clear waxed it again to cover up where we took off, and then we aged it with the dark wax. So this is a really fun and great technique. You can see how my waxing rag kind of came over top, so we could just easily fix that while it's still a little bit wet. We can just add a little bit more paint. It'll just be textured, which is kind of nice. You can see how fast this dries though. It's already starting to dry. So I hope you enjoyed that video. This is a 2-color distress using Annie's chalk paint. You can stop in and we can help you create this look on your furniture, or watch this video for more information. And don't be afraid to shoot us an email, send us a message, but we hope you enjoyed the video today, and tune back in for our next video, which hopefully will be next week or the following. Thank you guys. Bye.